Well, good morning, everybody. And how do you follow something like that? At least I'm here in person, and you can challenge, you can ask questions, you can talk to me over coffee. But I think the programming is actually very helpful in putting my talk, which is about risk management, after the presentation that we've just heard. Because I think a lot of people are worried, but maybe worried in the wrong way. And what I'd like to do is to offer a risk-based perspective on this challenge of restructuring Greece. So I come to you as a fellow of PMI, supportive of the PMI Greece Chapter, and thank you very much for another invitation to share with you. I've been to several of these previous conferences, and I've always been impressed at the quality of the speakers, but also the quality of the delegates and the discussion that we have in these events. And so PMI is ideally placed to support the restructuring of Greece, as we have in our motto, in our title, Project Managing the Challenge. Because as project managers, we understand that we need to have a vision, that we need to have objectives, but then we need to make it work in practice. And we need to have a way of actually turning that strategy and that vision and those objectives into real change. And project managers are the ones who can make a difference. We are the ones who are used to implementing change. And so it is our role as project managers to make this happen. And it's important, before we can start to do that, that we have an understanding of the challenge and of the vision for change. So I think what Paul has outlined in his previous presentation is part of that context, and it's important for us to understand what we're aiming at, but also to see our role as project managers in terms of implementing the change and helping others to do so. So I'd like to present something which is in that context, in that gap between the big picture and the implementation of change, which is our role as project managers. So let me ask with a question, start with a question. We all know that the future is uncertain, but how do we respond to that feeling? And I think this is very much the question that Paul Kazarian was just challenging us with. Do we see future uncertainty as scary, as frightening, as something which we see as dangerous, which makes us feel slightly sick in our stomachs as we look to the future and we think about what faces us in this country, in the wider European Union, in the wider world, or more close to home for our projects and our organizations, or perhaps for our families and our children? Does it make us just very little nervous when we face the future? And what is the correct response if we think that's true, that future uncertainty is dangerous? Is the right response to be very, very careful, to protect ourselves in whatever way possible? There is another view of the future, which is to say that, yes, we understand that the future is uncertain, but that's something that we can embrace. It's something that we can ride the uncertainty in a way which is more interesting, which is more challenging. For some people, the uncertainty leads them not to hide away and say, this is nasty, I want to protect myself. Instead, it leads them to roll up their sleeves and to say, this is challenging, this is interesting, this is why I am here, to face an uncertain future and to make something of it. And the right response with this view of uncertainty is not to protect ourselves and to be very, very careful, but it's to be brave, it's to engage, it's to be part of the solution to dealing with future uncertainty. And we have to ask ourselves the question, as individuals, as managers and leaders, and as project managers, how do we respond to the uncertainty that we find in our projects, in our businesses, in our society and country, and in the wider world? Are we the sort of people who run away, who retreat from uncertainty and seek protection? Or are we the sort of people who walk towards it and embrace it and engage with it and be brave in the face of that uncertainty? Now, different people respond to uncertainty in different ways. And it's not right or wrong if you're a cautious person who prefers protection. Actually, that is sometimes the right response. And sometimes it's appropriate for us to protect ourselves in the face of life-threatening uncertainty, or in the face of something which would threaten our project or wider society. But it's also true that sometimes it's the right thing to engage and to be brave. And we have to recognize different people respond in different ways. Both of these two responses are appropriate. But we can't do both at the same time. Or can we? Part of our understanding of risk is that it's a method, it's a way of thinking, it's a framework that helps us to deal with future uncertainty in a way that is both brave and careful. And that comes from our understanding of the term risk. And so let me start with a few basic principles of risk management. If we went around the room and asked people what they thought the word risk meant, then maybe we would have perhaps different views based on how we think about uncertainty. Maybe you think your job is like the guy on the right-hand side, just standing there waiting to be shot at, and the target is not up here, the target is here. And a lot of project managers feel like that. And my job is just to be fired at, and I'm in the firing line. Or I face, which one can I point with? I face, a very large challenge which is much bigger than I am, and I'm just going to get squashed, whatever I do. Or there is something hidden, lurking in my environment, which is not very nice. A lot of us have this view of risk, and this is not a correct view of risk. So if we think about risk from first principles, how does risk relate to uncertainty? Is it the same thing? I think we know it's not the same thing, because all risks are uncertain, but not all uncertainties are risks. There are millions of uncertainties in the world, but we don't write them all in our risk register or our risk log. We have some kind of filter. We don't have billions of risks, we have tens or scores of risks. So why is it that we don't think that all uncertainties are risks? There's some difference, some subset of uncertainties that we count as risks. And I use three simple words to distinguish between risk and uncertainty. I would say that risk is uncertainty that matters, because most of the uncertainties in the world don't matter. If it's going to rain in Kazakhstan tomorrow afternoon, I don't care. It might or it might not, it's not relevant. It doesn't matter. I don't need to think about it, write it down, or tell anybody, or prepare in any way. But there are uncertainties that do matter, and those are the ones that I need to be aware of and respond to. And how do I know which ones matter? The uncertainties that matter are the ones that, if they occurred, could affect my objectives. And if you're involved in projects and if you take a PMI approach and you understand the PMBOK guide and the risk management chapter of the guide, and you look at the definition of risk, you will see in the definition of risk we use in PMI that it connects uncertainty with objectives. With lots of words, it says a risk is an uncertain event or condition, so risk is uncertain, but it's an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on an objective. So it's uncertainty that connects with objectives. And we find this in the definition of risk from the ISO standard. There's an ISO standard for risk management, ISO 31000, which just connects uncertainty with objectives. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. But there were three words in the definition of risk that we use in PMI which are very important for us to think about. They're also in the definition of risk used by the ISO standard. What we have in our PMI definition is that a risk is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on objectives. And ISO says the same. It says risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, and then defines effect as deviation from expected, either positive or negative. So we have the idea of risk as being a double-sided concept. Yes, there are bad risks. There is downside risk. There are dangers. There are threats. And we need to be careful. We need to protect ourselves from those threats. But there are also upside risks. There are positive risks. There are opportunities. And we need to embrace and engage with those risks. So when we think of those two views of uncertainty, do we be brave or do we be careful? The answer is yes. because it depends on what type of uncertainty it is. And this is what Chris was telling us in his first challenge about Greece's debt issue. Is it a debt problem or is it a debt opportunity? And the answer is yes, it's both. And we have to both be careful and protect ourselves and also engage with the challenge in order to make a change. So what I want to remind you in my first point talking about a risk-based perspective on restructuring Greece is yes, the future is uncertain, but that's not all bad. There are good uncertainties out there which we can engage with, and that's true when we come to the national level as well as the project level. And risk management offers us a way of looking into that uncertain future. Risk management is a forward-looking radar. It scans the future. It says, what is there out there which is coming my way? And some of the things that I can see in the future are not very clear. They're a little fuzzy. They're a long way out. And I can just spot them, but I can see which direction they're moving in. And maybe I can decide if they are a good thing or a bad thing. And so here am I in my project, or in my organization, or in a government department, and I'm scanning the future, and I'm saying, what is out there coming in my direction? If it's a big bad thing, I can steer away from it before it arrives. If it's a big good thing, I can steer towards it before it arrives. The idea of risk management is to be an early warning system, to see ahead into the future, to give us time to respond, time to think and to be intentional about the decisions that we make, instead of waiting for the thing to arrive and then we have to do something. And so risk management should be helping us to think about that uncertain future and to decide which things we need to be careful about and protect, and which things we need to be brave about and engage with. And we understand that this is true in projects. Project risk management has been around for many decades. It's a well-established discipline, a well-established approach. We have standards, both the ISO standard and in PMI, we have our own standard for project risk management, a practice standard. There are professional bodies, the Institute of Risk Management or the International Risk Governance Council, for example. We have a body of knowledge, we understand how to do these things, and we have a well-established infrastructure. So in terms of the way that we manage risk in projects, everything is fine, isn't it? Isn't it? Maybe not. Maybe this is the theory, maybe this is best practice, and maybe there are still some challenges for us as project managers in the way that we manage risk in our projects. There shouldn't be. It should be well established, but as Panos has pointed out, we still have many projects failing, many more projects than we should have. We understand how we should do it. There's just an issue between the understanding and the practice. Well, that's true for projects. What about nations? If we want to think about this challenge of restructuring Greece, is this risk-based thinking relevant? Is it helpful to us to think about the big challenge of where we go as a nation with our current uncertainties? I think it is. I think there are three things which we need to remember in terms of risk-based principles. One is that there's no doubt that the future is uncertain, but there's also no doubt that that offers us both threats and opportunities, and that we can do something about that proactively, to be looking ahead and intentional to decide how to respond. But in order to do that, there are three things that we need. The first is that we need to understand our objectives. If risk is uncertainty that affects objectives, what are our objectives at a national level? What is at risk that needs to be managed? Secondly, where does risk come from at the national level? I think we understand where risk comes from in our projects, but how does this affect us nationally? And thirdly, who is going to do something about it? Who should be the owners of national risk and responsible for national risk management? And I'd like to just address those three things and raise those three questions based on what we understand through project risk management, but taking it to that national level. And then perhaps I'll bring it home at the end for us as project managers. So let's think about objectives. What are we trying to do as a nation? This is not just Greece. This is any nation. This is the United Kingdom. This is America. This is China. This is Suriname. Some big countries as well as small countries. And governments essentially have four basic responsibilities: protection, provision, persistence, and public good. Or if you prefer a different letter to start with, security, sustainability, stability, and social harmony. These are the things that we need to achieve, that we need to sustain, that we need to grow, that we need to protect in any nation, in your nation and in mine. And if we think about that in broader terms, we might say that when it comes to the past, it's important to remember where we came from. Greece has a long and proud history, thousands of years, the founders of democracy, the origins of much of our way of thinking, not only in the Western world, but more widely. You know, there is a huge heritage, and you can just walk around this city and other cities here to be reminded of it. We need to respect the past in building our nation. We need to protect the present. There are things going on now which are very, very difficult for people, for pensioners, for families, for people, young people seeking jobs. And we need to be careful and to protect our present society. But we also need to build a future which is secure and sustainable. And this is our objective as governments, as societal leaders, as business leaders, as citizens. To respect the past, to protect the present, and to secure the future. These are the objectives of building a nation. These are the objectives of restructuring Greece. And these are the objectives that are at risk. These are the objectives which are threatened by future uncertainty, but also where future uncertainty offers us opportunities to do something different, opportunities to create a better future, opportunities to achieve our objectives in a more sustainable way. So we need to focus on these objectives. And part of what we've seen in the earlier presentation, the financial context, is part of that, but not all of it. So if those are the objectives at risk, where is risk coming from? How are we going to be affected by that future uncertainty in terms of the uncertainties that matter to restructuring Greece or to building any nation? I'd like to use this acronym, these letters that make the word danger, as a structure to think about some of the things, some of the challenges that we face, some of the origins of risk for us as we come to restructure Greece as a nation or build any nation. The first is D, and Panos pointed this out, I think, in his introduction, to say that the future is not static. It's not easy to understand. There is a huge amount of variability and volatility in the future. The future is really dynamic, and that introduces uncertainties. That creates risk in itself for us as a nation. We cannot know what will happen tomorrow because things are changing so quickly. Ambiguity. It's not easy to understand everything that's going on. There are areas of cloudiness, of fuzziness, areas where we don't have all of the information at our hands, areas where things are happening which we cannot see, which are affecting the way that the future unfolds. The future is non-linear. You cannot draw a graph from the past, plot the lines, and see where it's going in the future. It could go anywhere. We have in the climate change world the infamous hockey stick, which says things are going along like this, but it's going to go like this. Well, is it? And you might say the same about the Greek economy. It's going along like this, and it's going to go, is it? Is that true? It's non-linear. And so we cannot predict the future from the past. Here's a word which our interpreters at the back are going to have trouble with. And thank you very much. We really appreciate the interpreters. Glocal. It's a combination of global and local. We're saying that things happen globally that have a local effect, but we can also act locally to make change globally. And so the world is much more connected than it used to be. And that introduces uncertainties that were not there before. One of the big challenges of the future is that it's emergent. So things are arriving from left field, from behind us, from places that we were not thinking, and appear in front of us suddenly. They just emerge without us seeing them coming. And that presents a real challenge. And lastly, the future is relational. We are not on our own. We cannot just operate as a single society, a single nation, a single organization, a single family or individual. We are much more connected than we used to be, and this introduces uncertainties that were not there before. So for each of these 6 areas, there are challenges for us as we seek to restructure this nation or as we seek to build any nation. And because of the challenges of time, I'd only like to focus on one of these things, and that's the question of emergent risk. How do we deal with things that come at us without warning? It's a real challenge. We've done quite a lot of work on this, thinking about this in the risk arena, and we've identified 3 major characteristics of emergent risks. They are unexpected and unpredictable, they just appear. They are big, so they have extreme impacts, not all bad, some of them are extremely good, but they appear with a big bang. And then when we look at them, we think we should have seen that coming. And they appear to be obvious when we have hindsight, when we look back. And these things have different names. Some people call them unknowable unknowns. Not just unknown unknowns, but unknowable. You could not have known this. This is something that was outside of your frame of reference. It's unimaginable. So when it arrives, you could not have seen it coming. The risk specialists, and again, I'm sorry to our interpreters, we'll call them ontological uncertainties. It's a Greek word, of course, so maybe it's easy to translate. Or we might call them black swans, the black swan events, which comes from the idea that 200 years ago we knew for certainty that all swans were white until we discovered Australia and New Zealand. And then we find big birds that are black that cannot be swans because they're not white. The idea of a black swan is inconceivable until you see one. And that's why this picture is used of these emergent risks. So if emergent risks are unpredictable and unexpected, you cannot see them coming. When they arrive, they're very big, and then we think we should have seen them coming. What can we do about it? And let me just give you some recent examples. I can't give you future examples because we can't see them coming, of course. So if I told you what one was, it wouldn't be one because I would have told you, which is very difficult. But we see these things. Of course, the financial crisis. Who saw that coming in the way that it actually unfolded? Maybe 1 or 2 people with good foresight. But most of us were blindsided. We didn't see it coming. The rise of ISIS and Islamic extremism. It could perhaps have been predicted, but it wasn't in the way that it's actually emerged in terms of their territorial ambitions and the way that they're actually operating. And then the migrant crisis, and that's obviously right here on our doorsteps. And the way that that has unfolded with such speed and with such numbers and created such chaos in the nations that are affected. And then this last picture on the bottom left is from the World Economic Forum. It's the connected global risks, just bringing the picture, reminding us that things are much more connected than they used to be. And we have to respond to all of those things and more. How can we respond? What can we do to tackle emergent risks? We need to be proactive. We need to do something in advance, but we can't see them coming. We want to be preventative and protective, but we can't see where they're going to hit us. So what can we do? Normally in risk management, we identify and characterize the risk in advance and then respond to what we see, to what we understand. But emergent risks we cannot see. And so much of what we face here in Greece, in our challenge of restructuring Greece, we cannot see what's coming because the future is dynamic and ambiguous and non-linear and so on. So what can we do? Let me suggest that there are some things we can do. First, we need to be aware of our blind spots, the things that we can't see. We need to know where those areas of vulnerability are. Where would we be hurt most if something showed up unexpectedly? Where would we miss the most opportunity if something emerged into that space that we weren't expecting? Let's identify those blind spots first, and then let's improve our early warning indicators in those areas. Let's build in surveillance capacity. Let's make sure that forward-looking radar is operative and focused into those blind spots and areas of particular vulnerability. Then let's make sure that we use a risk-based decision-making process. Every key decision needs to think about the potential effects of uncertainty and not to assume that we know everything because we don't. And finally, we need to build in resilience at all levels so that if and when something unexpected does happen, we have at least the ability, the contingency, the flexibility to respond to it. We don't know what's going to happen. We know something is going to happen. We need to be ready for something, whatever that something is. And this all comes from having a risk-aware culture, understanding that risk is normal, risk is natural, risk is everywhere, but risk matters, and that risk can be managed. So I think in terms of thinking of those origins of risk and focusing particularly on emergent risk, it's not doom and gloom. It's not a negative story because there are still things that we can do. Well, who are we? Who is going to do this? When we come to this idea of the big national picture, who is going to take responsibility for managing emergent risk? Who is thinking about these things? Who takes the responsibility and the accountability for dealing with it? The answer is not as simple as you might think, because responsibility relates to the scope of our authority. Where do I have the accountability to do something? And the answer is very broad. At national level, it's not just government. It's all levels of society. It includes societal leaders, religious leaders, community leaders. It includes business leaders and, of course, project leaders. In the Egyptian society, very hierarchical, very clear, the pharaoh at the top, and then he had his high priests. Maybe the government would relate to that position of being high priests and nobles. Then there were the scribes and the minor priests, and perhaps some of our society leaders might fit into that context. Business leaders, maybe the craftsmen, and then the peasants at the bottom, which is where we fit in as project managers, the ones who do the work, right, and get whipped all the time when we're told we're doing it wrong. Maybe. The answer is everybody is responsible. Why? Because everybody has objectives. And all of those objectives relate together. And for each of our objectives, there are bad things and good things that we should identify and manage. But we need to do it in society and in a coherent and aligned way. So as project managers, we need to understand how do our projects fit into our organizational objectives. As business leaders, we need to understand how do our business goals meet the needs of society and the nation. As government leaders, we need to think about how do the way that we manage and structure our government-based decisions, our strategies and policies, influence our position in the world and meet our responsibilities. These things need to be connected. But the good news is that it's the same approach, it's the same thinking that applies at all levels, which means that we can help. As project managers, we know how to manage risk. It's one of our key areas, one of our core competencies. We can help those at the next level up and maybe at 2 levels up to understand and manage risks in their area of responsibility. So let me wrap up with a few final thoughts, and maybe there might be an opportunity for questions later on. So the key messages here is that the future is uncertain, but that's not just a bad thing. That it is uncertain and dangerous in some areas, and for those dangerous areas we need to identify them and be careful. But some of the future uncertainty is not dangerous, it offers us an opportunity. It offers us a challenge. The right response is to be brave and to engage. And it's really important for us to do this. With our challenge of restructuring the Greek economy, restructuring the nation, thinking of our place in Europe and our place in the world, it's important that we get this right, but it's also risky. And risk includes bad things and good things. Our role, the important thing for us as we face this challenge, is to be proactive, to be thinking ahead, not just waiting for things to arrive and reacting to them, but looking for what's coming down the track and responding intentionally and thoughtfully so that we can minimize our threats and maximize our opportunities. What we need is people who are prepared to make a change. Who can make a change acting within their scope of authority? Who do we know who are experts in change management? Experts in taking a status quo, understanding a vision, and making the change from one to the other. Is it not project managers? Is this not our role in society, our role in business? Are we not perfectly placed to be those agents of change? But we can only do it within our scope of authority. Let me finish with a quote, or nearly finish, a quote from the great Gandhi. He said, "You must be the change you wish to see in the world." We cannot rely on somebody else to do this. We cannot point the finger at government and say, they must do something, or at the European Union, or at our lenders, or at our society leaders, or at our business leaders, and say, they have to do something. We have to do something within our scope of authority. It's important for us to recognize we have a role here. And so it's not pointing the finger, or it is in recognizing that when you point one finger to someone else, you point three back at yourself. I have to do something here. Tackling the uncertain future is possible, but it requires everyone to be pulling in the right direction. It's our core capability. We understand how to do this, but we do it in the context of a wider picture. Normally, projects, we think of our wider picture as being programs or portfolios or business strategy. Actually, our projects are being conducted in the context of a national effort, or they should be. And what we need to do is to pull together in the same direction to make it happen. Well, I hope those few thoughts have been challenging and helpful to you as you think about our role in this major challenge of restructuring Greece and taking a project management approach and seeing how we can help. I'm happy to take some questions, but thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.